Morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Just kidding. Welcome to my TED Talk on, just kidding. I'm being sassy today. I'm not sure why. I'm trying to get my energy up because as a menopausal woman, I do not sleep as well as I would like to. But today's video is really about these unknown childhood trauma triggers. And I was doing my walk this morning, and quick aside, I promise you that just putting your shoes on, if you can, and walking around your house on a treadmill, up and down your stairs, ideally outside in a blue or green environment, will do wonders for your mental health and physical health. It won't fix everything, but it can really help, especially if you are an anxious person. So that being said, I was thinking about how we go through life, and one of the big pieces of complex trauma is this concept of emotional flashbacks. And if you're not familiar with that concept, it's this idea that you have a flashback, but it's a feeling flashback. It's a regressed state often in your trauma in childhood. It's like your feelings, your brain and emotions just get transported back in time. So you may not have a visual flashback when you think about PTSD flashbacks, but it's that sudden feeling of often like fear, shame, anxiety, hypervigilance really being activated. It could be deep and long sadness and grief inside. And that is what often happens when we're going through our day. And so I wrote down, I think it's 11 things that I find that can be very transporting back to that chronic stress state of childhood and or adulthood relationship trauma. Number one is being disrespected. And this one gets really triggered when you become a parent, because for so many of us, we were not allowed to have a separate self or thoughts. It was disrespectful, and it still is for many people. And also, frankly, it depends on your culture and your particular family history. But when your kids start to sass you back and don't listen to you, if you are not mindful, it can trigger, this isn't about my child testing boundaries and trying to separate. It feels very personal and like you don't matter, or you're being actively shamed, humiliated, punished, made to feel small. And of course, this can also happen in your relationship with your partner. So anytime you feel that way, it's important to stop and pause and check in and ask yourself, what am I really feeling right now? Your kids are going to disrespect you. That's part of their job. They are teaching you how to help them become the best people that they are meant to be. And that is normal. But if you're not careful, you can personalize all of that and lose it and then act out in ways that you don't feel good about, especially if you don't want to blow at them. Number two, passive aggressive jokes by friends, colleagues, of course, family or friends. It's like that snide little ha 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 where no one really says directly what they're trying to say, but you sit there going, wait a minute, did you just insult me? But it's wrapped up in a package of like a compliment or a joke. I've told this multiple times. I have this friend that really devastated me to lose, but I realized over time after my divorce, they were it was just always something they said. I had a baby shower for them, and they didn't think I got the coffee out fast enough. And so they started taking over, which was embarrassing. It was a beautiful, shabby chic baby shower. They told me that I reminded them of Brandy on The Real Housewives. And if you know who Brandy is, and she said only in the best ways. I was like, what? If you know me, I might be sassy. I don't usually use a lot of potty mouth words here. I can occasionally have a potty mouth. I am very much from Texas, but that type, and no offense to Brandy, she is who she is, but that is not the kind of woman I am at all. So it's just all these little things that it took me years to finally catch up with. But these passive aggressive things, it's not a compliment to be called that you remind someone of someone who is acting, I believe, boundaryless and out of control on TV, for example. So anyway, I'm not sure what that was about. I think it was my growing, I don't give a F about things, my growing independence and autonomy, and really tapping back in to my frankly unmasked self. I started unmasking more and more after my divorce because I was very masked and being the perfect wife and the perfect mother. And when you lose all of that and it all crashes, you do have to kind of start to rebuild your identity. So I'll maybe talk about that later. All right, number 3, watching other people have normal families. This triggers me all of the time still. I would just told my therapist, like I'll be watching something and there'll be this like family on TV or something very like The Golden Bachelorette, and her parents are still alive, or her kids are have like aunts and uncles and cousins. And for me, I'm an only child. Both of my parents, very eggshell, very toxic, lost my dad very young. My mom and I have been in no contact for about 6 years. It was a very toxic relationship with my mom, especially in our adult lives. So much worse in some ways. The point is, when I see other families that have what I feel like it's normal-ish, it's not chaotic and bad. Yes, all families have some drama, but it's like pressing your nose against the glass to see other people have just like a support system. Like I just can't even imagine what that would look like, to have a sibling to turn to and say, yeah, mom is crazy, or to have an aunt or uncle for my children that I felt was a really safe, great human being for them, or having parents alive at this age. Like I don't get it. But that can trigger our childhood trauma and our wounds in major ways. All of the things we longed for. And if you got those in adulthood, great. It can still trigger you. But if you never get them in your life, it's even more triggering. Number 4, being alone. Now, I talk a lot about I love being alone and isolating, but there can be a sense of feeling your aloneness. It's not that you are physically alone so much, but feeling the loneliness, like I was just saying in the last one, that you really don't have anyone to raise your kids if something happens to you. You don't have an inheritance coming from family. You're financially completely on your own. Things like that. Just feeling alone in the world. And it can bring up these conflicting feelings because for many of us, being alone and isolating actually, I believe, can be good for our nervous systems. But this is about when you really feel it, not just like I'm saying the physical space, but really tapping in these moments sometimes where you realize how truly alone in the world maybe you always were as a child, and maybe now you still are. Number 5, classic holidays. This fantasy about what holidays should look like and be like and what you hope for, and watching other people kind of, like I stopped decorating a lot. I used to, sorry, that's my dermatologist. Tomorrow I'm getting like a basal cell thing biopsied, so you might see me with a Band-Aid on the next few days, and even more if I have to get the whole plastic surgery thing. It's that little thing I got right here. Anyway, so when I stopped decorating, I was going to say, like when my kids were little, I had this fantasy of my Martha Stewart life. It was quite a lovely life in many ways. But once I became a divorced mom, really raising 4 kids alone, like I will do Christmas, but all the decorations and having a storage unit in California. So just watching people have, whether it's their home, the holidays themselves, the spirit of the season, we all know this one, can be very triggering for the things that you longed for in childhood. And like I've said, when you think your adult life is going to fix your childhood, like this perfect marriage, I'm going to give my kids what I didn't have, and then you find yourself not able to do that, there's a lot of trauma and work. It's taken me a lot of time to work on that. Number 6, watching other people get things easily. So it's like, why do I have to try so hard? Why does it seem like other people, things just come to them when you've suffered so much? And so if you've had a pretty difficult childhood or even, difficult adult life, we all know that things are not what they seem. But oftentimes it feels like, why is it me? Like, why do I have, and I do believe some of us have more bad luck than others, or more crazy things happen. I know this to be true. And so everyone has their thing. I always have cat hair here, but it's like, it can once again feel like, what's wrong with me? Why is life so hard? Why do things not come to me in the same way? And that can really bring up a lot of wounds. Number 7 is having, I first put anger, but really it's watching anyone have big feelings in any regard, especially if big feelings were a sign of danger. So you had a parent with their big angry feelings, they raged and yelled and screamed. Maybe it was when they were manic and really happy that bad things happen. even seeing people be like excessively happy can be triggering because it might bring up the fact that you don't feel that way. It could be a sensory response to what's happening for them that you're triggered by, like, why are you being so loud? It could, like I said, mirror a parent's big feelings in some way that triggers this fear, often this hypervigilance in you. The next one is driving. I mentioned this yesterday, is that really, I truly believe that driving creates this massive projection, this experience of projection all of the time. Someone cuts you off, they don't look out for you, they almost pull into you. It really becomes about so much more in so many cases. Yes, it's frustrating when someone almost hits you. There's no doubt about that. But I do believe that driving in and of itself. And then for me or for you, maybe in your childhood, I know with my kids, being in the car was terrible. I don't know what happens in the car with kids. It's like they lose their minds. And from the time they were pretty young, I had like a 3-row car. And I started putting my oldest son in the front, 1 in the front, 2 in the middle, and 1 in the back to space them out. So there can be actual trauma in the car. Maybe for you, it was with you and your siblings and your parents lost it. It could just be that other drivers trigger you. But I think that can bring up a lot of things like all of this. It's not about the thing. It's about the feeling state, the wound, the trauma, the repeated traumas that you had. The next one is just good things. When good things happen, it feels like it's not real. Your first thought is often, well, I can't hold on to that because I never got to have good things. Or if good things happen, that means bad things will happen. I have a lot of clients that talk about the evil eye, and I know there's a history to all of that. But this idea that if I put out my own joy in the world, it will come back to me in a bad way. And I think it's important. I've always told my kids to read the room, as I've said, don't talk about things intentionally to people that you know are suffering or don't have what you have. Just be mindful. But at the end of the day, good things can really feel like unsafe, especially if you didn't have a lot of those, or they were minimal, or there was always a price attached to something good happening in your life. And then the last two are really this, is that someone repeatedly not acknowledging you. What do I mean by that? I have a couple neighbors, where I live now. I could do a whole video on Orange County in California. It's generally not my vibe, but Laguna used to be a very open, loving, accepting, artsy community when I first met my ex-husband here 100 years ago. And I moved back here with my kids, and it has actually become a lot more like Newport 2.0. It's not Newport. If there's a thing, we have bumper stickers that say, if you're not nice, or be nice, or go back to Newport when you're in Laguna. But the point is that it happens with women. And so it's interesting because with men, if they don't acknowledge me on a walk and I know a neighbor, I don't really, in some ways I feel a little relieved because of just being a woman in the world. And when a man notices you, there can be stuff around that. But this idea that when I have neighbors, I have a couple neighbors, the husband is so sweet. And the wife is just a straight up, will look at you and not wave back, not smile. And I saw one this morning. I was walking down where I walk at the beach, and she doesn't live in my neighborhood, I don't think, but lives nearby. And she never acknowledges me. And I'm not saying I acknowledge everyone, but growing up in Texas, it's like a thing where you make eye contact and you might smile. P.S. That did not go well when I went to school on the East Coast. They were like, what are you looking at? But the point is, someone intentionally just not acknowledging you. It pisses me off in a way that is stupid. Why do I care? But it can feel like rejection. It can feel, even though you can know up here, this isn't about me. Or maybe they're shy or they're distracted. But when it happens again and again and again, and nothing's happened between the two of you, that can be very triggering. And I do think it's about something about women, and I'll talk more about that maybe in a video, with my mom issues and female friendships that can make that difficult. And the last one is being left out, not being included. So many of us, and I do think this is really even more common if you have something like neurodivergence and autism, is that you're very familiar with not even necessarily bullying, though that can be definitely a thing, but just not being accepted for who you are. And watching my youngest child, my kids, go through school here, to be honest, they have all struggled in different ways socially, all of them. And I do think that, being a single mother, being raised in an affluent community where your mom is on the low end, there's a lot of that stuff that goes on here. And it's also high school and middle school. We all know, I don't care what decade you went to school in, for most of us, those are difficult years. But this idea of maybe you're at work and your coworkers are laughing and telling a joke and you walk up and they disperse. And maybe there's nothing about you, but it feels like rejection. Or there's a party and you weren't invited or whatever. I mean, and you don't have to invite everyone to everything. I get that. But the feeling state of not being included, especially if you felt rejected in your own family, can be massive. So I think that's a huge one. Anyway, those are, I think that's 11 of the most common, sort of subtle triggers that you might not be aware of. What can you do about it really quickly? This video I know is going longer. You want to pause and maybe do some grounding where you start to, what can you notice with your eyes? What do you see? What do you smell? What can you touch? What can you taste? That kind of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or really just noticing all of your senses, because all of your senses can trigger these things too. Sense memories around smells and visual things that remind you of all of these things can make it worse. And then you want to really separate and ask yourself, what's really happening right now? Maybe do like a butterfly tap where you pause and you rock back and forth, do some breathing. You really want to ground yourself in that this feels like the past, but that's not happening right now. Where am I? Who am I? What is this about? And often naming it, that Name It to Tame It by Dan Siegel, where you say, I am feeling frustrated. I am feeling scared. I am feeling anxious. Even just putting a label to that can help calm and soothe and identify what's happening inside. And so any of those kind of classic techniques, and then distraction techniques, even just moving on to the next thing. But I will say it's important to try to pause and honor and identify, what am I feeling? What is this about? Is this sort of old stuff that doesn't really apply to me anymore? And to really actively work on separation, because the last thing I will say is that for many of us, enmeshment in our parents' feelings and the behaviors, we were such a part of that, we weren't separate selves, can make us take on feelings sometimes where we're not really sure, well, what belongs to me and what belongs to you? And that's really important. So that's it. Thank you so much for being here. Please take good care, and I will see you tomorrow. Have a good day. Bye.